Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics common to both the PowerBasic console and Windows compilers. Today we will look again at enhancing an organisation chart, which we have created programmatically. This was our organisation chart at the end of the last video. It was only after releasing the last video I realised there was a flaw in the code. As you can see from the hierarchy, this user here, Gordon Buckley, reports to Tyler Jordan. Unfortunately, this is not correct. Going by the data we passed the application, Gordon Buckley should report directly to the Chief Exec, Jonathan Russo. So there is a flaw in the design of the code, which we're going to address today. Plus we're also going to take the opportunity to put some colour into the hierarchy. But first, let's have a look at the code and see if we can address this flaw. After some investigation, I discovered that the flaw exists within the build tree function. The build tree function is the thing that puts the data into each of our tree nodes. And we're determining when to close nodes off by comparing the current number of elements against the elements in the previous data row. And if our element count is going down, we add these two tags to our HTML document. This is the source of our flaw. Depending on the chart data, we're not adding enough of these tags. So we need to make this a little more programmatic. We're going to add in this new line of code. We're still going to be adding these tags to the HTML document, but we're going to use the repeat command. The repeat command will repeat a string as many times as you wish. And in this case, we're taking the number of previous elements minus the number of current elements, and we're using that number to repeat this string. If the result of this calculation is the number 1, then we will send these two tags only once to the document. If the result is 2, we will send the tags twice. So let's try running that code now and see what we get. If we have a look at the chart, we will see that Gordon Buckley is now directly reporting to the Chief Executive. And this corrects the flaw in our chart. So now that we fixed that problem with the generation of the chart, we're now going to make some cosmetic changes to the chart itself. I'm going to add some colour to the boxes on our chart. If you want all the boxes to be the same colour, this can be done with a single line of code within the cascading style sheet. Since we want to change the background colour of the data within the span tag, we need to look at that section of the cascading style sheet. So here is the section of the style sheet where the tree span control is. We're going to add a single line of code here to set the background colour. We're simply setting the background property to a particular colour. If we save that now, and we refresh the organisation chart, we'll see that we now have a background colour on every single box. This does make the organisation chart more colourful. So what else can we do with the organisation chart to make it more user-friendly? At the moment, the chart is generated from this base level data. This staff list contains the hierarchy. While this makes it easy for our code to actually handle the creation of the organisation chart, this is not something you would normally expect to have in a human resources department in the way of data. So we're going to go back a step and create what you would normally expect to see in a human resources data system. I've created a simple little spreadsheet. This spreadsheet contains all the members of staff within our organisation. It has a number of columns to store the name of the user, the name of their manager, a unique ID for each member of staff, and a column containing the unique ID of each person's manager. Additionally, it has a department column to say which department the member of staff works within, and additionally a status column to say whether the person is currently employed or not. This is probably the minimum amount of data you would expect to see in any human resources dataset. Each member of staff has a unique ID. This is essential in any organisation because it's quite possible you will have two people in the organisation who have the same name. The larger your organisation, the more likely this is to happen. And having the information in this format makes it easier for staff to keep it up to date. So to save us having to directly read from a spreadsheet, we're going to save this spreadsheet in CSV format. And that's our file saved as CSV. So we can see the CSV file is now sitting in here quite happily. So there is our CSV file, listing all of the staff with their unique IDs, their manager unique IDs, and their departments. So let's now go back to the code and create a function whose job it is to turn this CSV file into our staff list. So in our PB main function, this is where we started the generation of the organisation chart. We'll need to create a new function to convert this HR file to a format that our generate org chart can handle. So before we call the generate org chart, we're going to call a new function called convert HR file. This will take two parameters. The first being the path and the name of the CSV file. The second being the output file, the location and path to the staff list. So we will create two new constants to hold that data. Our CSV input is HR staff list, and the staff list is going to be called stafflist.text. So let's create this new function. So this function is going to have to handle two files, an input file and an output file. So we're going to dimension them up front, one called str input and one called str output. We need to ensure that the output file is deleted before we attempt to recreate it. So we're going to use a try-catch block to wipe any file that is currently sitting with the output file name. Having erased that file, we now need to read the input file into the input array. And as before, we're going to use one of the functions in our file library called read the file into an array, which takes the two parameters, the path and name of the input file, and the array into which we want to put the data. If that returns true, then we have successfully loaded the file into the array. As we know the input file has a header row, we can ignore that row. So we're redimensioning the output array from 0 to the upper bounding of the input array, -1, which is the header line. Now that we've created that, we can now go ahead and step through our input array. But we're going to create some local variables to handle the data as we go along. So we're going to use a fairly standard for next loop, from long R equals 1 to the upper bounding of the input. We're not going from 0 because the 0 row has the header line. And the first thing we will do is to pick up the department name. We can do that quite easily by using the parse command. As it's a CSV file, we can put our delimiter in as a 0-length string. This allows the parse command to use its inbuilt functionality for CSV file handling. Next, I'm going to get the name of the user. Again, using the parse command. Because we'll want to use the department later on, I'm going to tack on the department string onto the end of the user's name and delimit it with a tilde character. You'll see why we do this later on in the program. Next, I want to get the manager's unique identifier. Again, using the parse command. We know that one of the staff does not have a manager, and that's the chief executive. So we need to handle that quite separately. If the unique identifier of the manager is not an empty-length string, then we need to work out the hierarchy. If the member of staff has no manager, in other words, if they are the chief exec, then we make the hierarchy just equal to their name. So in order to get the hierarchy, we're going to call a new function called getHierarchy. this will return the hierarchy to the user, and we can tack on to the end of it the user's name, which will include their department. We will create this getHierarchy function in a moment, but we'll push on inside this function and finish it off. On the assumption that we now have the hierarchy, we can put that hierarchy into our output array. And we're using the counter variable to say which element we put that into. And immediately after that, we're putting an increment command in to add 1 to the counter. So once we have stepped through all of this input data, we now have a fully populated output array. However, since the data within the HR CSV file is not sorted in the manner we wish to sort it, we need to use an array sort command to sort it in ascending order. And once we have sorted that array, we can then save that array out to disk. And again, we're going to use one of the functions in our file handling library. So that completes this function. We'll now go on and design our getHierarchy function. This, as we've seen, takes 2 parameters, the first being the name of the input array, and the second is going to be the manager's UID. And we will return the string as the hierarchy. So we will create 2 local variables, one to store the manager's name and one to store the hierarchy itself. As we've received the manager's UID coming in, we need to pull back the manager's name, as this will form part of the hierarchy for this user. So we're going to create another new function to get the manager's name. There are 2 parameters involved in this, the manager's UID and, again, the input array. We'll double back and create that function at the end of this one. And assuming we get back a manager's name, we can then populate the hierarchy with that manager's name. However, that would only give us one level of the hierarchy. We now have to go through a loop to circulate right up to the very top of the hierarchy to get the chief executive. So we're going to use a while loop, while the manager's name is not blank. And we're going to call that getManagersName once more. This will work because the getManagersName function returns the new manager's UID, as well as the manager's name. And again, if the manager's name is not blank, then we can add it to the hierarchy. And at the very end of the function, we can trim off any trailing slashes at the end of the hierarchy and pass that string back to our calling function. Using functions like this allows you to traverse a very complicated hierarchy and still get the path all the way to the chief executive. However, now we have to create the getManagersName function. And this is going to be yet another for next loop, looking through every record within the input array. We've got the manager's UID, which is their unique identifier. So all we need to do is to sweep through this array and find a match. So if the first element in our array, the first column, is the manager's UID, then we've found a match. At that point, we're going to update the manager UID variable with the manager of this manager, so we can then recurse upwards to get the next one further up the tree. And we can pick up the department and the name of this manager. Having found that, there's no point going any further through the rest of the array, because these UIDs are in fact unique. So we can exit the for loop at this point. So now we have declared the 2 variables we're using in here, this should compile quite cleanly, which it does. So let's try running our application now and see what we get. We have now generated a new org chart, and we can see from the organisation chart that we have the department now sitting quite happily at the end of the person's name. While this is very useful information, it's not presented very well on the screen. But the fact we have this data here means we can manipulate it. The buildTree function is the function that generates our chart. So I want to do 2 things in here. The first is to take the department name away from the boxes, except on the first box for the person who's the head of that department. this will be the first person that appears in the hierarchy. In order to do that, we have to work out what the department is, what the previous department was, and what we need to put into the box. I would also like to colour code the departments, so that each department has a different colour. So we're going to create some local variables to allow us to track this information. One for colour, one for department, one to store the previous department, and one for a department header. This is the code we're going to put into our span tag. So in the line of code where we pick up the name of the member of staff, this will currently contain the department name. So we're going to add 2 new lines of code to pull that information out and then remove it from the name. Again, using the parse command. We know that this data is delimited on the tilde character, so we can use that as our delimiter. So that will handle the chief executive. For all other members of staff, I need to determine what the old department was. This is the department in the manager immediately above the member of staff we're attempting to draw. We can get at this quite easily by using a parse command on the /delimiter with the -2, which means we're working from the right hand side of the string going back 2 elements. And again, we're picking up the department for this member of staff, pulling it out using a parse command from the right hand side of the name string. Now that we have the current member of staff's department, we can then compare that against the department of their manager, which is stored in the old department variable. If the two are not equal, then we have had a change of department. So what I'm going to do is to make the department header equal to the department string plus the BR tag. The BR tag is the equivalent of a carriage return line feed in HTML. This will mean the department will be on the first line and the person's name will be on the line immediately below. Otherwise, we're making the department header an empty len string. We can then add the department header to the front of the person's name. So let's try that code and see how far that gets us. If we run our chart again, we will see that the departments have disappeared from all but a select number of staff. The top of IT has Tyler Jordan. Everybody underneath that member of staff, although they are in the same department, they do not have the department shown. Except where it's a new department, for example, networks. And the HR staff also only have it for the head of the department. And the head of marketing is appearing with their department, and all the staff underneath them have no department shown. This is a step forward. The next thing we need to do is to colour code each department. So slightly further down the code where we actually use the span command, we're going to add something in there. We're going to use the style command to set the background colour within the span tag. In order to do that, we're going to pass the current department name to another new function, whose job it will be to determine the colour. And by simply placing this code in the tail end of the span tag, like so, we can actually drive it quite happily. So now we need to create this final function, the getDepartmentColor. This takes a single parameter, which is the name of the department, and will return a hex color for the department span tag. So we're going to use a simple select case statement here. We're forcing the test on the department to be uppercase, and we're testing it individually. So how do we actually get the colors? You'll find there is a very good color picker control. You merely have to pick the color that you wish. You'll find the value appearing here in the hex value. You then just have to paste that in to our code. So we have picked a color for IT, for marketing, for HR, and everything else will be the default color. So as we know there is a networks department, let's pick a color for that one as well. So having set our colors, all we need to do now is to return the value to the function. Now that that's in place, we can try running our application again. And we will go back to our chart and we will reload it. And there we now have a fully colour-coded chart. Each department is colour-coded, so you can quite easily see the members of IT, the members of HR, the members of marketing, and the members of the network teams. And the head of each team is shown with the name of the team above them. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we've corrected an error in our original code. We've also taken our chart a little further forward by colour coding each individual department. This should make your hierarchy charts much easier to read. Hopefully you'll find this code useful in your applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.